Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Mastering Speaking and Presentation Skills with Andrew Payne. I'm Robert Allen, APM Branches Manager, and I'll be your host today. It's great to see so many people have joined us today to hear Andrew's presentation. I personally would like to extend my thanks to all the volunteers of the APM 6 and APM branches for all their efforts in organising these webinars and making them happen. So, over to Andrew. Andrew is a TEDx speaker, productivity coach, blogger and campaigner. Andrew serves people from all walks of life, helping them to take control of their time so they actively achieve truly epic goals. I must admit, I'm delighted that Andrew's come back to join us. He kindly gave a webinar just as lockdown begun on procrastination. And I picked up a lot of great tips from that. So Andrew, I'm looking forward to today's session and over to you.
Thanks very much. Hey, listen, it's great to be here. Just to begin with, I wonder how many people on this webinar have ever been to a conference where there was a speaker and you were looking forward to hearing the speaker speak, but when the speaker spoke and they did their talk, they just stared at the screen. They basically just read their own slides, and their slides was just an onslaught of bullet points, and you wanted to focus on what they were saying, but you were so bored and left a bit disappointed afterwards. And I wonder how many people here have been on one of those Zoom calls where, for whatever reason, there was a speaker for part of that call, but the speaker was the size of a postage stamp. So trying to focus on the speaker and what they were saying was somewhat tricky. And then also next to the speaker, you've got the 25 other faces of all the other people on the Zoom call. And you want to focus on the speaker, but you can't help noticing bottom right, not bad looking. Bottom left, still in his dressing gown. Get dressed, man, show some self-respect. And I wonder how many of you, whether you were either at a conference or it was on a Zoom call, have heard one of those speakers where you were excited by the headline of whatever it was they were going to talk about, and you're really into the subject, but then their voice was so drony. Like there was no variety in terms of the pacing or the pitch of their voice, and you were getting so bored, but you were battling to stay focused because you knew the content was going to be good, but then you couldn't help but think, I wonder what's for tea tonight. What am I going to, do I cobble something together that's in the fridge? Maybe, no, I'll go to Tesco's Express, but hang on a second, have I got my face covering? The thing is, if you were bored and unfocused, you probably weren't the only person. And when you think that research suggests that even for a good speaker, the most that any of us will remember 24 hours later is 30% of what we heard. So goodness knows how bad the figures are for lousy speakers. But the question you've got to ask yourself, therefore, if you're doing speaking for whatever reason, what can we do as speakers? What can we do and say to ensure that we are truly memorable? What can we do or say to ensure that the people we're speaking to, that they take the action that we want them to take after we finish speaking? And what can we do or say as speakers to ensure that the people listen to us, when they are listening to us, they're thinking, yeah, this is a seasoned speaker, a good communicator, not a hopeless amateur out of his or her depth. Well, my name is Andrew Payne, and I truly believe that anybody can be a great speaker. And when I think back to sort of 12, 13 years ago, I first stepped onto the stage, and I hadn't done any public speaking since like I was at school. So, I was about 34 at the time, my memory serves me right. And so it'd been years since I've been on stage. And as I stepped up on stage to deliver what I was going to deliver, I was greeted with this sea of faces. There's about 200 people in the auditorium. And to me, it felt like an ocean of faces. And all I needed to do was deliver a quick notice to the church. I was in a church about a beer and comedy social I'd organised. Just some details. That was it. Like 30 seconds. But seeing this ocean of faces, I just went to jelly. My knees were knocking. I forgot what I was supposed to be saying. I made a total hash of that notice. Nobody knew what they were supposed to do afterwards. And it was a deeply humiliating moment. And yet, 12 years later, I've just done a TEDx talk. It's been very well received. Prior to COVID lockdown, I was regularly on stages, generally in schools where I do a lot of coaching, speaking work, generally at sixth form level. But sometimes if it's just a year group, it's 100. Sometimes it's 300 or 400, depending on the size of the sixth form. in churches where I do a lot of speaking on behalf of the charity work that I'm doing, your groups can vary from 50 to 200, 300, but whether it's 300 or 50, to me, it's no different. I'm not fazed by it anymore. And in lockdown, the webinar numbers have varied. The biggest I've done is 800. The smallest was about 30. But I feel when I'm doing a webinar for 800 or 30, I feel the same. I don't feel fazed by it. So if I can make that step forward, then truly anybody can. You just need to know what to do, what not to do, and then do what to do. So in today's webinar, I'm going to split it into 4 parts. Part 1, we're going to look at the basics. And because they are the basics, I'm going to skate through this really quickly because I'm going to make the assumption that many of you will already know this. And so I don't want to spend too much time going over something that you already know. Part 2, we are going to look at the 3 critical components of creating inspirational content. Now, this isn't an exhaustive list. And actually, when I do full day workshops, programs, I work through 8 critical components. But in the time that we have, I'm going to work through 3, but if you get these 3 right, you truly will elevate the quality and the impact of the content you present. Part 3, we're going to look at delivery skills, everything from sort of the basics around, well, what do I do with my hands when I'm not moving them around, to some of the bigger picture stuff as well. And then at the very end, we're going to look at fear and imposter syndrome, because, I mean, imposter syndrome, for those of you that don't know, it's this feeling you get where it's like a wave of paranoia comes over you. And you feel like you're going to get found out somehow, that you're out of your depth, that everyone else is more intelligent than you, and now everyone's going to see how stupid you really are. You don't belong here. You're not worthy of being here. And speakers do grapple with imposter syndrome on a regular basis. And I have to say, it's something that doesn't bother me anymore. And there's some mindset shifts that I've made that have really helped me deal with that. So that's going to be part 4. So there's a lot to cover. So let's get straight into the basics. Absolute basic, and I know I'm asking for trouble here because I'm going to be talking about internet connection. So just as I give you my tips, my internet's probably going to go down on me and you'll all be laughing. But I've done a lot of podcasts and a lot of webinars in lockdown. And whenever I see that there is technical trouble at somebody else's end, out of curiosity, I guess I'm a bit nosy, I always ask them, listen, were you connected wirelessly or through an Ethernet cable? And it's always wireless. And so if you want to give yourself the best chance of giving a smooth delivery to the people you're speaking to, do make the effort of connecting with an Ethernet cable. Now, some of you will say, oh yeah, but my Wi-Fi box is in an inconvenient place. Well, buy a 20-meter length Ethernet cable, but make that effort, and at the same time, boot everybody else off your Wi-Fi. So at the moment, in my house, I've got my house full again. I've got 3 boys under 7 at home. I've got a 15-year-old at home, and they're at home because they've all been having COVID tests today. But currently, as I'm speaking to you, Alexa's off, Google Mini's off, all laptops are off, phones are off, the iPad's off. I'm very popular right now, but do make that effort. Ethernet cable, boot everybody else off the internet, and it will give you the best chance of giving a smooth delivery. The other thing is, do invest in some kind of, I've got this external mic that I use. This isn't an expensive piece of kit, it's like 50 quid or something. And if you are sitting down delivering as I am, and you're going to stay fairly close to the mic, 50 quid is all you'll need to spend, but it'll be worth it because the quality of the sound will be richer. Whereas if you're relying on your laptop mics, it will just be a tinnier sound. I'm actually about to invest in much more expensive microphone software because I like to stand up and move about a bit. Whereas if you're going to go for a smaller sort of 50 quid external mic, it won't pick up the sound as well. The other thing is visually. If you look behind me, you can see a yellow wall. You can see if I move over, and you can still see part of the radiator. You'll notice my underpants are not on the radiator. Now, I don't mind you seeing what pants I wear particularly, but it's just, if my pants are on the radiator, it's something that will distract you away from me. And if your mates are also on this webinar, you'll probably text them saying, listen, have you seen he's left his pants on the radiator? I know it sounds like obvious stuff, but think about the visual. What are people going to be seeing? And as a note, just as a heads up, people often comment on my bright yellow wall because it's sunny and it's bright and it's nice to look at. But take the visual seriously. You know, that is what people are going to be looking at, and make sure that you've eliminated distractions, generally clutter or underpants on the radiator. Another basic, if we go back to, when we go back to delivering in person, it amazes me how many speakers deliver a talk and they have a slide deck, but they don't have a plan B for if the slide deck doesn't work. And even in really swanky venues where everything is up to date and modern, you are still going to get technical problems. Honestly, it happens all the time. And so if you are delivering with a slide deck, make sure you have a plan B, because your job as a speaker is to be able to deliver regardless of what happens. And so I had some technical issues at an event I was speaking at last year, and the techie was really stressed. He was trying to get the thing working. I was like, listen, dude, it's fine. I'll just do it without. It's not a problem. But when you're presenting in person, you're going to use a slide deck, have a plan B. And the last absolute basic I'm going to give you is that if you're speaking for more than 15 minutes, it becomes really important that you have some techniques to just break up the status quo of you just talking at people. Under 15 minutes, that kind of interactivity is optional. It's good, but over 15 minutes, it becomes critical. So to give you some ideas of what I do and some things that you could do, one thing that breaks up the monotony, I've got props. I've got my Sherlock Holmes hat, I've got my Arsenal hat, I've got my COVID mask. All of these have made appearances on talks that I've recently done. The props, the costume, they just break it up a little. You could just ask for a show of hands on something that you're talking about. That breaks it up. It could be a video clip. On today's webinar, for parts 2 and 3, we're going to go into a slide deck. I've not got a particular keenness for slide decks particularly, but I'm conscious I'm going to be speaking for 35, 40 minutes. So I want to break it up for you. I want to break up the visual, and it's really important that you think about that if you're going over 15 minutes. Another thing you can do, you've got the polls that you can do online, or when I'm in person, let's say I'm at a school and I'm delivering, I'll time things in, something at 8 minutes, something at 15 minutes, something at 22 minutes, something like that. And I might say, let's say I'm delivering on productivity and growth mindset. So usually when I'm delivering to sixth forms, the schools want me to really encourage them, but get them at a point where they're kicking off from year 1. They're not thinking, do you know what, it's A-levels, I'll just knuckle down in year 2. And so that's part of the remit of why they've asked me to speak. So if let's say I want to share with them the average number of times a person checks their phone is 120 times in a day. It's taken me 3 seconds probably to share that. But what I would do in the school is I'd ask for a volunteer. No one ever puts their hands up. So I'll just pick someone in the front row. I get that person to stand up. I'll say, you pick me 3 volunteers. Always causes a bit of a chuckle. That person will pick 3 volunteers. I'll say that person, you're done. You can sit down. I've got 3 volunteers now. Then I'll get each of those volunteers to say, listen, how many times do you think the average person checks their phone? They'll give me an answer. I'll then get the rest of the people there to vote on who they think is right. Now that whole palaver has taken about 5 minutes, but I haven't done it to use up time. I've done it to create a break in the state of me just talking. As I say, once you go over 15 minutes, some of those things that you can use to break state, it's critical. Under 15 minutes, it's optional. So there's some basics. I'm figuring a lot of you would have known that anyway. And so what I'm now going to do is attempt a seamless transition into my slide deck. So I'm going to attempt to play my slide deck. So what you should all be seeing is this header slide about content. I'm going to share with you 3 critical components. Let me tell you, you get these right, then your content will come on in leaps and bounds. And these are things that you can do immediately to make your content better. So the first thing is the start. Now, so many speakers mess up their starts in different ways. So let me give you a few examples. Hi, my name's Dave. I run a 6-partner legal practice. We cover commercial law, family law, wills and probate. We've got offices in Basingstoke and Croydon. Oh man, so boring. I mean, I'm bored already just saying that now. Or what about, hi, my name's Andrew Payne. I'm an international speaker, been heading up stages for 12 years. I recently shared a stage with Tony Robbins. He said I was a better speaker than he did. And you're thinking, blimey, this guy is really trying very hard to establish his credibility. Might have some insecurity issues. Or what about, hi, I'm quite a nervous speaker, so you'll have to bear with me. No, you did not just say that. The problem is, you have to imagine that the people that are listening to you speak, they come to the webinar or the conference with baggage. That baggage could be the row that they had last night with their partner and they're wishing that they hadn't said what they said and it's playing on their mind. Or maybe it was the belter of a goal that they scored last week. And if you're anything like me, those times where you score a belter of a goal. It happens once in a blue moon. So when you do it, it just keeps replaying on your mind for days. Well, you as a speaker, you have to break into that baggage. You have to tell people that you have arrived, listen to me, and what I'm going to share is going to be worthwhile. And there are 3 ways that you can do this really easily in an understated way as well. You don't even have to go in shouting the odds, because often a mistake that I see speakers making is they come in at feverish pitch. That's how they start. And then they've got nowhere to go. They then have to carry that on. And if you've listened to anyone at fever pitch for more than 5-10 minutes, it's exhausting. So I'm going to share with you 3 starts that I use. And in fact, I can say this categorically. I use these starts every single time. I can say to you, in all honesty, that looking back at the last 2 years, I have not started any event, workshop, or talk where I haven't used one of these 3 starts. So the first brilliant start to use is what I did today. So if I'm presenting in person, I'll say, hands up here, anyone who has ever, or if it's on an online webinar, I'll say, is there anyone here who has ever? And today I used the situation of a speaker reading from his or her own slides, the speaker the size of a postage stamp, and the speaker with a drony voice. But the wonderful thing about these 3 questions, or of asking questions, is that it gets the audience to start thinking about the content that you're about to share. Now, I wouldn't have said, is there anybody on this webinar who likes butter? Because that'd be ridiculous, because it's got nothing to do with what I'm talking about. I wouldn't have said, hands up here, anybody who has heard Tim Cook from Apple speak live, like you were there, because I'm guessing that if anybody on this webinar has, there's only going to be a handful of you at best. You want to ask questions where most people could put up their hands and where the questions really get people thinking. Now, you might say, well, does it have to be 3 questions? Could it be 4 or 2? Absolutely. It could be 2, or it could be 4. Generally speaking, I will go for 3 questions because there is an ancient speaking strategy called tricolon, which has been used over the centuries and continues to be used today, where 3 has a rhythmic pattern, a rhythmic quality. We use the pattern of 3 again and again and again. You hear it here, there, and everywhere. You see it in marketing. A Mars a day helps you work, rest, and play. Or it could be a 3-word phrase. There's so many marketing phrases that are 3 words. I mean, John Lewis's one that they're about to ditch, never knowingly undersold. That's tricolon. If you look at my marketing for this webinar, you'll see a lot of patterns of 3 in the content. And so ideally, I would say ask 3 questions. And the beauty of this is you can ask them really quietly in a really understated way, but it really gets people resonating with you and thinking about what you're going to be sharing about. This is the technique that I use more than anything else when I start a talk. But I do also start with an unexpected way. And there's 2 ways that you can start with an unexpected way. One is that you come straight in with a story. You don't even introduce yourself. Literally, your first sentence you say is the first line of your story. And the second is you come in with crazy antics, dancing on stage. Maybe you come in dressed as a chicken if your talk is about chicken welfare. Now, I don't use crazy antics because for me, they're risky, really risky, and they need to be well rehearsed and well thought through. Because if they're not, you get something a bit like this. It's just so awful. It's just so awful. And when Theresa May was interviewed afterwards, she was insistent that it was spontaneous, not rehearsed. That's part of the problem. And she didn't deliver it with 100% conviction or authenticity. It's not really her. I don't know what she was thinking. And that's a problem if you're going to go in with antics. You've got to be absolutely sure it's going to work. when I start with an unexpected start, it will be the first line of a story, like I say. So I do a lot of coaching of resilience, and I've got a fantastic story that I always kick off with for my resilience workshops about when I screwed up a business pitch. There's irony in the story. It always gets people laughing. It is quite a funny story, to be fair. And it leads beautifully into what I'm going to share about. So if you're going to kick off with a story, make sure that the link isn't tenuous. Make sure there's a very clear link and that the story leads beautifully into what you're going to share about. The third way that I start is with facts. To be fair, I don't use this as much as the other two, but I do use this. I've got a talk coming up next week where I'll be starting with 3 facts. And the session I'm doing next week is actually on procrastination and how the self-help industry has utterly failed us, because as the self-help industry has got bigger, so has the one problem it should have solved by now, which is procrastination. And so I literally start with $11 billion. That's the annual value of the self-help industry in America alone. 76 billion pounds is the annual loss for British businesses of procrastination every year, according to credible financial research. And so that's how you would go in with your facts. Again, in reverence to Tricolon, it's generally better to start with 3 facts. Sometimes I'll start with 2 or 4, depending on what I'm doing and depending on the time limitations. But if you start your talk either with a story or with some facts that are insightful as well. Let me just say this, again, if you had me doing a presentation on butter and I'm presenting to the agricultural industry, I'm not going to tell the agricultural industry that did they know that butter is a dairy product, because that would be ridiculous. So the facts that you share, they need to be facts that share some insight on what you're about to talk about. They need to be facts that maybe the audience wouldn't already know or have thought of. The second critical component to inspirational content is the close. Now, too many speakers, when they do a close, they basically just sum up what they've said. And as they start to sum it up, as people, we start to just kind of drift off a little bit, because we already know what they've talked about, as long as we've paid attention, I suppose. But your close, everything in your talk should build to your close. Your close should be the absolute pinnacle of your talk. In fact, your close is so important that I wouldn't even attempt to create content until I know what my close is. What is the transformation that you want to achieve through doing your talk? What would you like people to do that they're either not doing, or what do you want them to stop doing what they're doing? What is the key change that you want your talk to create? And if you can't think of one, well, is there any point to you doing your talk in the first place? There should be something that you want to achieve. Your close should be a very clear call to action. Now that you've shared whatever you've shared, what do you want people to do next? Now, sometimes when I work with speakers, I'll say, yeah, but I dropped loads of subtle hints and nobody took any action. Well, yeah, obviously, because by all means, drop the subtle hints, but then you have to pull them together in the close by saying, this is now what I want you to do. Because to expect people to put 2 and 2 together and then take action is wrong. People will be able to put 2 and 2 together, but they may not take action unless you tell them exactly what you want to do and how you want to do it. So when you start thinking about how you're going to close your talk, don't think about just summing everything up. I mean, you can give a quick summary, but keep it very, very brief. The main part of finishing is your close, your critical call to action that is absolutely clear. And at the end of this, at the end of my talk, I'm not going to go on and on. This isn't a sales pitch, but there will be a call to action for those of you that want to take this further. I wouldn't just do a webinar like this without one. I wouldn't do a talk without a critical call to action. When I'm speaking for the charity that I do a lot of work with, obviously the call to action will be some kind of specific call for people to get involved with the charity. Sometimes it's appropriate to ask for funding. Other times, depending on what I'm doing, it's about asking for volunteers who could possibly become trustees. It depends, but be very clear about what you want your talk to achieve, and then be very clear that it is there in your close. That is your close, the pinnacle of your talk. Third critical component of creating content is in storytelling. And there's been a lot said on storytelling on sort of social media and the like, and you're probably familiar with, you know, the power of stories. Here's a few things. So data, graphs, diagrams, methodology, all of that stuff is important. You know, as people, we want to know that what we're hearing has credibility, that it stacks up. But 6 months later, nobody will remember any of that methodology, any of the points or the graphs or whatever. What they'll remember will be the stories you told. That's if you told any, and so long as the stories were really compelling. Now, there's two types of stories that I use in my business presentation, in my business talks. There's personal stories and business stories. And I just want to break it down a little bit. So some speakers that I speak to say, well, yeah, but like, I don't have a very eventful life. You know, I can't think of any stories. Rubbish. Everybody has had an eventful life in some way. The stories that you use, it could be the health scare that you had. It could be when you thought you were going to default on paying your mortgage. It could be when you were 6 and you couldn't afford to pay your sister back for the money she'd lent you for the ice cream that you'd bought. The story, think back through your life. Start thinking about the funny stories. Start thinking about the self-deprecating stories. Start thinking about the stories that, you know, actually could tug on people's heartstrings a little bit. And then start thinking about what you learned from them. What are the insights you can pull out of those stories? Because in those very personal stories, the people listening to you, this is how you can create rapport and relate to them, which is why I told the story of me struggling on that church stage with my church notice falling apart. It's a personal story. It's something that happened to me that was real. And maybe if you've struggled with public speaking, you can feel like what I was going through. Business stories are slightly different. Business stories for me are where you split that story into 3 parts. You need a story of where, as a business, you created a fantastic result for the person that you were serving. And the 3 parts of a business story are, what was the pain that that person had before you dealt with them? Part 2 is, what did you specifically do as a business to alleviate that pain? And part 3 is, how was that person left better off after you did business with them? Now, when I'm at networking events, as frequently I am, a lot of networking events, you each sort of everyone takes it in turn to introduce himself. You get like 60 seconds. My 60 seconds will literally be one story, one powerful story. The before, the pain, what I specifically did, and the after. And I will tell that story because I know that people will remember it. People will come up to me afterwards. But if I just tell people the different workshops that I'm running, no one will remember, no one will care, no one will come up to me afterwards because there's no emotional connection. Now, some of you might think, well, yeah, but I'm not on the front line of my business. I don't know a lot of these stories. Anybody in business development, there's a great phrase that I heard that was, you know, your stories, sorry, I'll say it again. It's a great phrase I heard where your arsenal of stories, that is what you want to create, an arsenal of stories. And I love that. And I was inspired by that as a phrase. And so for the charity that I do a lot of work with, I'm not on the front line of that charity, but I do a lot of their business development, storytelling. And so the people that are on the front line, they're briefed. They know exactly what I'm looking for. They know that I need these stories regularly. They know how to get the stories to me. And so there's like a chain of communication. So it may well be, if you're in a business and you're involved in business development, but you're not on the front line, you need to create that chain of communication so those stories start landing on your desk. But you need an arsenal of stories if you're going to create fantastic content. You need ideally the blend of personal stories and business stories. Then, of course, use them. What about delivery skills, though? Let's say you got some great content. I mean, you're going to stand up or you're going to sit down. Well, when I'm presenting in person in pre-COVID times, I would always stand up. I've heard it said that when you sit down, you give away your authority. I also think that your diaphragm, which controls your voice box and your breathing, it works more effectively when you're standing up, without a shadow of doubt. I also think when you're standing up, you're more interesting to watch. You're more animated. Whereas when you're sitting down, there's less arm movements going on. And so where possible, stand up. But sure, in the online world that we now have, the likelihood is you're going to be sitting down, but in which case you really need to start thinking about your arm movements and the variety in your voice, which is what we're going to get onto now. So tone and pace in a voice. You know, I could start speaking really fast because I'm getting really excited, and that's okay to speak fast for a short while, but then it's exhausting for other people to listen to if you keep going really fast, and then you need to pull it right back. And then as you slow down and your voice gets a little bit lower, you start to sound more thoughtful. And then for extra power and emphasis, you could try a pause. You could repeat the point as well with the pause. Let me say that again. You could repeat the point. But we don't naturally talk in this way. And so if you're doing a lot of speaking, you need to start practicing speeding up, slowing down, the pauses, the rehearsing of repeating important phrases. You need to practice it so that, I mean, at first it will sound a bit rehearsed and a bit weird, but then the more you practice it, the more it starts to feel natural. And the problem is a lot of people will create great content, but then they won't rehearse that content. They won't rehearse in the speeding up, the slowing down, the drawing back, the pauses. And so that's when either someone sounds like a droning monotone, or they're just like talking at feverish pitch and there's just no variety. And then it's exhausting listening to them. So practice, I mean, that is absolutely critical. And, you know, you can film yourself. And one of the things I did early on with a lot of my speaking was constant filming on my phone. It was excruciating at first watching myself. I hated it. But after a while, I started to get used to filming myself, what I looked like, what I sounded like. And I started to get into that mental state where I could start really sort of logically critiquing myself. And that was a really helpful thing that brought on my speaking. We've all got smartphones. You don't need to set up a studio. You can just do it in your front room when the kids are in bed, but start getting into that habit of recording yourself, then having a look. How do I sound? And in fact, while I'm at it, I'm going to go and look at a few TEDx talks. What do I like about the speaker? What's not working for me about this one? This one's diabolical, but why? Start practicing, and that is a crucial thing that will keep you moving forward. The other thing I want to think about is your arms. Now, when I was preparing for my TEDx talk, I read that the most viewed TEDx talks have 30% more arm movements than the least viewed TEDx talks. Now, in order to come up with that kind of research, someone out there has been watching a lot of TEDx talks. There is a problem though. If you then say, well, okay, loads of arm movements, that's obviously the way forward, then you run the risk that you could look like a maniac who's drunk too much coffee if your arms are just going crazy all the time. So that's the value of recording yourself. You need to start bringing in arm movements. You need a variety of arm movements. And that's why I hugely recommend you start, if you want to take your speaking forward, start looking at other TEDx speakers and TED speakers particularly in that kind of critical, well, what do I like about their delivery skills? What do I dislike? But with arm movements, you need a variety. You need plenty of them, but there needs to be a balance as well, so you're not going absolutely crazy. Now, some people say to me, well, the thing is, Andrew, let's say I do my arm movements. What do I do with my arms when I'm not moving them around? You're saying, like, don't be a lunatic. So I'm going to show you now. I'm going to come out of the slide deck. We're going to come back into some live video. On part 4 around fear and imposter syndrome, we're going to stay with the live video. So let me just shut down my slide deck now. Shut it down completely and come back to live video. So in a minute, you should be seeing me as live video. Hopefully that's big. So I'm going to adjust my screen here, just so you can see, if you're moving around, you've got arm movements going, the thing that you do with your hands when you want to rest them. The problem is, and here you can see I've not got my football shorts on here. The problem is, if you've got your hands behind your back, you can look a bit like a Victorian funeral undertaker. You've got your hands in your pockets, teenage, bit of a slouch, your shoulders start to droop forward as well. Start playing with your hair maybe. No, don't do that. The best thing to do with your hands when you want to put them to a resting point is have them like this, just crossed, just over your navel, like that. Actually, it's quite a nice posture. It's quite relaxing. And then you can uncross them and move your hands and start doing it. I'm conscious that the light fitting is probably a bit off-putting here, but then you come back above your nose. That's what you do with your hands. And even if you've delivered most of your talk with your hands like that, that's okay. That's okay. It looks okay. Much better than if you stand like that, where even your beginners look a bit bored now. So let's talk about fear a little bit. Let's get this light fitting out of my way. It looks a little bit like a halo, which is probably, I feel like sometimes I deserve a halo over my head. But there we go. Right, that's out of the way. So fear. I don't get nervous now when I public speak particularly, but when I was preparing for my TEDx talk, boy, I was so nervous. It was last year, and there were a lot of things that made it particularly nervous for me. One is obviously a TEDx talk was going to last out there on YouTube forever and a day, but also the subject matter was hard for me to talk about. It was my experiences of domestic violence in my former marriage, from my ex-wife, and number one, that was hard for me. But number two, number two, I guess there's so many TEDx talks that are delivered by women about domestic violence, about their experiences of men, and there were none that are out there by men, and yet a third of victims of domestic abuse are men. So I knew it was quite a big deal. I really wanted to do this, and domestic abuse is awful, whether you're a woman or a man, and whoever your perpetrator is. But all of these things were conspiring. Then I was thinking, well, what if I'm doing this talk that's very much standing up, speaking about men as well, and the struggles that a male victim of domestic abuse would suffer. What if someone in the audience is a woman who's had a horrendous time? And so all this stuff's going around and around in my mind. I'm really nervous. And so I did just a few really basic things that really help in giving you confidence with your public speaking. The first is that I prepared my content very, very early, far earlier than I had to. In fact, my script was absolutely finished and done. It had been re-edited umpteen times and worked through the speaker coach 6 weeks before the actual event. And then bit by bit, I just spent time learning it every day, just 15, 20 minutes, not really going crazy on it. But if you want to learn your content so that it's absolutely in your head, so there's no possible way you can freeze up, the way to do that, a bit like revising for exams, is just really early, that just drip, drip, drip effect over a long period of time. But the thing that will do is it will give you confidence as you step onto stage that you really know your stuff. A lot of speakers are nervous because they don't know their stuff. They're winging it. And I mean, I'd feel nervous if I was winging it. And in fact, before the actual TEDx event that I spoke at, and obviously we're on our speakers WhatsApp group, there were speakers at that event that were still fiddling around with the script 3 or 4 days before the event. So one of the things you can do to be a more confident public speaker is prepare your content very, very early, and then start rehearsing it very early, but just a little bit every day without fail. Because then, and this is where we come to sort of the second part of staying calm, I started doing my breathing stuff. So not like, oh, I'm fading, but like breathing in a really understated way. So I'm sort of breathing in quite deeply for count 7, holding for 7, and letting go for 7. So on the actual Saturday when the event was, I was doing that quite a few times in the day just to kind of draw myself back, get myself out of that panic zone. And then once I'd come to a point of more calmness, I'd then reassure myself, I'm well prepared. I'm better prepared than other speakers here. It will be okay. This script has been really well thought through so it doesn't alienate anyone. And so when you're in that calmer state that your breathing can get you into, that's when you start to affirm yourself with real concrete truths that ground you. So sure, by the time I stood up on stage, I was nervous, but the nervous, it didn't hold me back. It didn't undermine me either on the day and leading up to it. I wasn't torn apart with nerves. It was a healthy nervousness. But for anybody that does feel the nerves of public speaking, the breathing, the affirmation, the starting very, very early on your content and then just rehearsing it in that drip, drip way a little bit every day so it's really in you, that will help you with your nerves. Now, some of you might say, well, that's fine, but listen, imposter syndrome bites me on the nose every time. Can you just give me 2 or 3 tips on imposter syndrome? Well, a lot of speaker coaches, I'm conscious of the times, I'm going to wrap this up quite quickly now, but a lot of speaker coaches will encourage you to fight against imposter syndrome and, you know, you're better than this, and you deserve to be on stage, all this kind of stuff. For me, with imposter syndrome, I welcome imposter syndrome. I like it. It's like it's my best friend, because if imposter syndrome is biting you on the nose, it's only going to do that if you're trying to step forward in your life and make progress. you don't get imposter syndrome when you're just sitting still, not pushing yourself out your comfort zones. So for me, it's not a warning sign. It's a sign, it's confirmation that I'm moving forward. So I view imposter syndrome a little differently, perhaps, than some people. The other thing with the imposter syndrome is, for me, it shows, if you suffer from imposter syndrome, that you want to be judged on merit. It's important to you that people don't just get into their position through blagging it. The integrity is important to you. So for me, it's a sign of my integrity if I'm feeling imposter syndrome. And the third thing is, you can't actually be an imposter, technically speaking, if you don't willfully mislead people. So as long as you're careful in your marketing and self-promotion, well, you can't, it's not possible for you to be an imposter. And so for me, as a speaker, I have to be careful in what I say. If I'm not bold in what I say, then I'm not going to get booked. But at the same time, I need to ensure that what I do say in my promotion is absolutely right and factual and isn't over egging the pudding, to borrow a cliche. So I remind myself of those things, and that has helped me with imposter syndrome, to view it more positively as a sign of progress, as a sign of my integrity, and then to remind myself that actually you can't be an imposter if you don't willfully mislead people. I'm going to move to questions and answers. We're going to open this up in a moment. For anybody that wants to take this further, obviously to develop speaking skills, it's going to take a lot more than a 1 hour webinar, but hopefully I've given you some pointers and some ideas that you can use straight away. For anybody that is interested in taking this further, either you're interested in finding out, well, what does it look like to work with you, Andrew, like as your individual client, or actually, this would be really cool for my group, my team, then get in touch with me via my website. It's very simple, www.andrewpayne.co.uk. My surname is P-A-I-N, there's no E on the end. And halfway down my homepage, there's a book a free strategy call. Just book a call, it's a half an hour call. And within that call, I can sort of explore with you what you're looking to achieve, what you're looking to aim for, and what I can do. Because I do have set speaker programs, but more often than not, when I'm working with people, what I deliver is bespoke and tailor-made to the needs of that person. So I'm going to throw this back now and open this up for any questions for anybody that wants to ask some.
Excellent. Thank you, Andrew. You shared some great tips there. And I can only read out the comments that are coming through from people. Vicky has said, no questions, but a fantastic webinar. Thank you. Very useful tips. And I'll definitely take these forward. No longer with us because he's left, but Bezed said, many thanks, Andrew. So far, fantastic presentation. Unfortunately, I've got to nip off to another meeting. But just to let everyone know, we are recording this and we will make it live on the APM website. So I'll move over to some of the questions, if you don't mind. And the first one is from Casper, who said, what are the key differences between presenting live and presenting virtually?
For me at the moment, one of the big differences is that I'm sitting down. And I truly believe that presenters and speakers should be stood up. And which is what I'm saying. So this piece of kit is a great mic if I am sitting down, but I need better quality mics. And having sort of assessed things, I'm going to take the plunge and spend some good money on getting the room kitted out so that I can stand up and deliver. And so therefore, given that you are seated, and most of you probably will be seated, then the boredom factor, if you're talking for a long time, is a really important thing to take on board. So today I've broken up the speaking with going in and out of slide deck. There was a video clip in there. But you really need to think hard as speakers if you're sitting down as to how you're going to keep people engaged. And just in fact, just building on that, a couple of weeks ago, I did the mental health first aid course, the England course, and it's a brilliant course. Everybody should do it. It should just be like, just be compulsory for the nation to do it. But doing 2 full days online, wow. I mean, because I'm quite focused, I really wanted to learn about it, but by about 2 o'clock, I was zoomed out. And so there is that challenge. I think as presenters and speakers, we need to be shorter. We need to really think about the interest factor and how we liven it up. I meant, even these silly props here, having fun, interactivity, online polls, it really is worth doing that, because people just get bored and then they zone out. And because there's less accountability when everyone's at home, they really can on their other phone be checking out Facebook and goodness knows what. So it is a challenge, that engagement, I think.
Excellent. Thank you, Andrew. Josh has asked about slides and how do you get the balance between pictures and images versus words and text?
You know, Josh, I'm really pleased you asked that question, because I didn't feel I wanted to open it up for questions. And I didn't feel I had time to really cover how I do slides. So I'm going to give you some tips, Josh, for slides. So how I do them, you don't have to do it this way. I hate slides that are riddled with bullet points. So boring. And I hate slides that just look so corporate and dull and uninspiring. And so what I do, there's about 4 or 5 really simple things that I do. Bullet points, if you're going to have any, just have 1 or 2. And don't have them flying onto the slide with like being dropped in. Just let them appear and fade out, because all that inside formatting on the slides is just cheesy. But I use images mostly, and I'll go to, you can use Unsplash, you can use Pixabay and Pexels, you can use those for free. That's fine, that's what they're there for. You sometimes have to be quite creative with your search terms. If I wanted a slide of a man crossing the road whilst shouting at his child, to find that on those sites would be quite tricky. So you usually do have to spend some time searching. But the beauty of those 3 sites is every image will be a high definition image that you can download for free and use, and there's no copyright problems. And so what I'll then do is I'll stretch that image over the whole slide. I'll then, on the opacity thing, I'll just take it down a little bit so it's not too much in your face. And then if I've got a logo, I'll make it really, really, really diddly small at the bottom. And I'll go with that, and I'll try and focus on images. If I'm then going to bring in a bullet point, it will always be in an Arial font that's really clear, bold white usually, and the background of the slide, I'll put the image on a black background generally, because it just is a nice clean look. And then the formatting from slide to slide, as you've seen when I've done mine, is there's no messing about and fun and games as you transition from one slide to the other, and suddenly there's like a big explosion. It's just fade in, fade out, fade. That's the most simple. So that's what I do. I stick to those rules, and generally the slides do look pretty good, I would say.
Perfect. Thank you, Andrew. And I'm sure that's given Josh and many of us some great ideas with slide creation. Whaley has asked, and I laugh when I say this because I've experienced it only recently. When you get memory blank during your presentation, it's happened to us all, I'm sure. But how do you cope with it when you're mid-flow in a presentation?
Well, so was it Haley that asked that question?
Whaley.
Whaley, I'm so sorry, Whaley. Whaley, listen, you may have spotted that my memory went blank actually today a couple of times. It's really helpful when you know your content really, really, really well, because it won't prevent memory blanks, but it does mean you can pick up a bit more easily if you know your content inside out, back to front. And listen, as a speaker, sometimes, and this happens at schools quite a bit, they'll tell you that they want you for 40 minutes. You'll get there to do your 40-minute talk, and you can do some classroom stuff afterwards. And then they'll say, oh, you know, it's 40 minutes. It's actually going to be half an hour. Is that okay? And you're like, oh, crikey, right, I need to take 10 minutes out. What am I going to do? And so the better you know your stuff, the more you can chop it up a little bit if you need to, but also the more you can find yourself again with memory. So all I can say, I mean, it's not a nice thought. It happened to me a couple of times today. It sometimes does. Sleep helps. I've got young children. Sleep's an ongoing challenge for me, so maybe I can blame that a little bit. But the more you start early in learning your content, bit by bit, that kind of drip learning is the best way to learn anything. Then the more that when you deliver, if you do have a memory blank, you should find that you can pick yourself up quite quickly. The other thing I would say is a covering statement, particularly if you've got rapport with your audience, you can actually say, hang on a second, where was I again? I've done that a few times, and that is okay to do that. I've also admitted to losing I've lost my train here. What I'm going to do, I'm going to go here. And that little bit of openness, as long as people can see that you're not really stressed about it, then the audience won't think it's weird either. They'll be like, oh, okay, it won't look out of place.
Yeah, no, great advice. So I truly believe the people that are listening to you present want you to do well. I think they understand if you sometimes hit a small little challenge. And as you say, it's your response to that to
I think
them.
that's true. And I think through all of this, with me presenting the 3 different ways of starting and the stories and the close, nobody expects perfection. I mean, maybe on a TED talk where you know it's going to be on YouTube for years, but nobody expects perfection when you deliver a talk. So don't try and aim for perfect. And yeah, as you said, people want you to do well. So the occasional memory blank, if you can explain what's going on quite openly and honestly, it actually makes you quite human and someone that's easy to relate to.
Yeah, no, totally agree. So just joining some questions together, and you've mentioned during this webinar that it's all about practice, learning your content, but some people have mentioned that, oh, last minute, I've got a request. Can you give this presentation for me? You're not too sure what the content is. Sometimes it's not necessarily to your internal colleagues / friends, and maybe it's external. When you're put in that position, are there any tips that you could share with people?
Yeah, I mean, and it does depend on the situation. So if it's an audience that you're likely to have rapport with, where you're suddenly speaking to them you weren't expecting to be, you could be very honest about that. I mean, obviously in some situations it wouldn't be appropriate to say, listen, this has been landed on me today. That wouldn't be appropriate. It is okay to speak with some notes, I would say, as long as you're not staring at the screen all the time. That the problem, if you've got notes, is that you rely so heavily on them, that it becomes a problem. It is okay. I mean, I know this might sound a bit, if it's been landed on you, how are you going to get together a flip pad and a flip chart? But sometimes if you're improvising, having a flip pad and a flip chart is helpful. I've once been at an event where I was doing something and everything went down on me, and the IT went down, and I knew what I was going to do, but I had to hurriedly write out, sort of prepare a flip pad very quickly, and I did that in 20 minutes. It's not a nice situation to be in. But the start that I mentioned with the 3 questions, if you can think off the top of your head of asking some people some questions and getting people interacting with you, that is helpful. So, you see these awful presentations on The Apprentice where, they don't know their numbers, the product's lousy, and they're trying to cobble something together and it just looks awful. But you can turn most presentations into a little bit of a conversation if you're unsure of your content, by just asking questions and just presenting some bare basic bones, particularly if you've got 1 or 2 stories. And that's why, for me, for example, with the charity, I sometimes speak at quite short notice for them, but I know the stories inside out, back to front, and the stories do vary. A story that I'd have used last year, I probably wouldn't use this year. There's always fresh stories coming to me, and I learn them and read them and really think about how I would say them as they come through to me. Then if it falls on me to do a sudden school assembly, which it sometimes does, I've got a story there. I don't have to then spend the night stressing about what I'm going to say to 500 kids. But as another point, I would just say this. I have to do quite a lot of harvest assemblies to kids as young as 4 and as old as 11, all in the same room together. And again, when you ask those questions, you start with those 3 questions. It's a really powerful way of getting people starting to think about your subject. It opens up that kind of dynamic and conversation. It works with adults, it works with kids. So that's what I would do. I guess I'd start with questions, go with stories. Usually for me, to be fair, I do get reasonable warning. So it's not landed on me an hour before.
Excellent. And I can imagine 500 children are quite a tough audience. I'm sure they're friendly and laugh along, which is good.
They used to be a tough audience, and I used to dread doing school assemblies. But then when I started starting with the questions, so for a harvest assembly, for example, I'll start with hands up anyone here who had tea last night, and then hands up anyone here who'd like to tell me what they had for tea, hands up here who had breakfast, hands up here anyone who'd like to tell me what they had for breakfast. Everyone's pitching and telling me, and then I'll be like, well, what would you have done then if there was no tea when you got home last night? What would you have done if there was no breakfast? And then I'll give a very short summary of the food bank and what we do. Job done. Job done. And if I'm coming in at well under the time that I've got, it's not a problem. No one's going to complain. But it allows me to keep it very simple. I don't have to learn vast amounts of information. The kids have really interacted with it. And that kind of questioning works just as well with adults as it does with kids.
Excellent. I think this kind of links in with Samantha's question, who says, thank you, that was great. Samantha's been struggling with doing online presentations and that she can't see people and their reactions. Do you have any suggestions on how to deal with this?
I probably want to, Samantha, if you want to message me afterwards, just to unpack that a little bit more. I mean, I can't see at the moment, I think there's about 183 people on here. I can't see anyone's faces. For all I know, some people are getting huge value from it, and some won't. And every talk that I do, if there's a couple of hundred people, there's going to be a percentage of those people that won't like my delivery, that won't like how I've done it, that would prefer it a different way. And so I'm really comfortable with the fact that I can't please everyone, that I can only do my best, that as long as the majority found value in it, that's great. And so maybe, and I need to unpack that with Samantha, but I'm at peace with the fact that some people don't like what I've got to say and some do, and that's okay. And maybe at a deeper level, it's about making peace with that rather than whether you can see their faces or not. I don't know. I need to unpack that with Samantha. Some people would say it's easier not to see a sea of 200 faces out there, because often when you can see your audience and you notice someone looking down at their phone, you have to really kind of put that to one side, because you think, well, are they bored? Am I boring? So that in some ways, the fact that I can't see 200 people, I find that slightly easier. When you see people, it can be more off-putting. So I'd probably want to unpack that with Samantha. But like I say, without wanting to repeat myself, maybe it's about making peace with the fact that some people won't like what you've got to say. It doesn't matter how well you do, they won't, and that's okay. That's okay. As long as some of the people are getting value, that's all that counts.
Yeah, no, totally agree. You can't please everyone all of the time. So that's really good. Now, I can see that we've got 2 minutes left. I've probably got about another 15 odd questions. And alongside that, lovely comments of thanks, great webinar. I wonder if we end up with Ashok's question, who said, timing is my downfall. What do you use to get the timing right? I think that's quite apt with 2 minutes to go.
Yeah, I do so much public speaking in different formats, and I've mentioned schools, businesses, school assemblies, churches. It's all public speaking. Timing is critical. So I was preparing this webinar actually a couple of weeks ago, and I thought, I know this webinar back to front, I know it well, but I was like, I'll just do a time run through. It's an hour and a half, but you were very clear it's 40 minutes. Like, how is it an hour and a half? So some of the getting the timing right is the discipline of preparing early and timing it, writing the script early, not the points or whatever you want to call it, and timing it again, and timing it again, and then timing each part. Well, what is the introduction? How long is that taking? How long is the starter? How long is the story taking? So really, it's about organization and timing it. And I am on it with timing, because with all of the talks I'm doing, I know how long each section lasts, which is why if I get to a venue and they want to cut out 10 minutes because something's changed, I know how much each part takes, just because I've timed it and I've noted that down. So I'd say start early, rehearse early, use a stopwatch and start getting used to how much each section takes. And then it's just simple maths.
Yeah, no, completely agree. Again, I found myself giving someone else's presentation only earlier today, and the notes they gave in PowerPoint, they said how long the presentation or how long I should talk for on each slide, and then I also used the clock in PowerPoint that kind of went alongside it, so I was able to keep my timing right. I think I finished a couple of minutes earlier due to excitement and just getting the information out. But no, that's a great point. So Andrew, I can see our time's up. What I'm going to do, if you don't mind, is send you these questions, and perhaps I could ask you to give some feedback on them, and we'll put them on the APM website so that we can support people into the future as well, if that's okay.
Yeah, no, that's great. And last thing I would just say, anybody that's found value with the webinar, if you can put a comment on social media and tag me in LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, that'd be amazing. But no, bless you for having me, and I hope that you've found value in today's session.
We certainly have, Andrew, and the comments that are coming through from people says thank you, great tip. I personally, on behalf of the APM, would like to extend my thanks to Andrew for giving up his time and his knowledge today. So thank you, Andrew.
No, you're welcome. It's been a pleasure.
And now I'd just like to extend my thanks to everyone who's joined us today. Thank you for giving up your time to come and listen to Andrew. And I know that you've got a lot of great tips to go away with it. I hope that you keep well, and I hope to see you at future APM webinars. So bye for now.